I'm Mark Bentham.
I'm Katie Holloway, and you are listening to Ordinary. And today we are joined by another special guest. We've got Anita with us, Dr Anita Datta. Anita, can you introduce yourself? Tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Dr Anita Datta, and I am a child adolescent psychiatrist living in Haywards Heath, working in London and the NHS.
Cool. And anything else?
Oh.
Do you do anything for fun?
Yeah. Well, when it's the summer, I do like to go stand up paddleboarding down at Shoreham.
Can you stand up on the paddleboard?
I can. Actually.
Great. You beat Graham then.
It's quite a chat. Really? Okay.
I'm sure on one of our episodes he was saying that he could kneel on it.
Okay.
No, he did stand for a very brief moment.
It's quite a skill, to be fair. You do need to engage the core.
Yeah.
So it's quite fun. Yeah, but it's not summer yet, so it's a while before I'm gonna.
It's getting there.
I think this is about as good as it's going to get.
Oh no, no.
No, it's going to get better. All right,
no
Katie.
It just
Stop
feels,
with that.
Yeah, sorry. That's a right dose of negativity to start us off with. It's been so cold and wet that this feels so warm and nice that I'm like, yes, this is the peak.
Yeah.
No.
But I'm trying to recreate Australia by going on the. So I used to live in Australia for 14 years and moved back to the UK in 2019. So I have known sunnier days. Let's just say that. Yeah. But still, this is nice. The weather's nice today. So.
Yeah. And Anita, you're a psychiatrist.
A child adolescent psychiatrist.
Yeah. And that's different to a psychologist.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. So that's a good time to explain. So a psychologist the clinical psychologist also, you would usually see doctor in front of their name, and they're specialising in therapies and psychology, they're thinking. But I did medical training as a medical doctor and then specialised in psychiatry. And psychiatrists could potentially do therapy, but also are able to prescribe medication, so antipsychotics, antidepressants. So we can prescribe medications as well.
Great. Yeah. That's a helpful definition, because I wasn't sure what the difference was until a few weeks ago when I asked you. So there we are.
It's worth just saying as well, before we say, that Anita is also a member of Christchurch and
is
a believer. That is, not just a friend who's a psychiatrist, but it's a friend who is also a believer and a member of the church.
Yes.
Dear listeners, can you guess what our topic is today? Because we haven't actually said yet.
Paddleboarding.
Yes. No. It is. We're going to talk about mental health today. It's actually, did you guys know, Anita probably did know, it's National Mental Health Month or something like that. So I'm going to pretend that was really well planned and not just a nice coincidence.
Clearly.
No, it was not. I'm not going to lie. Yes, let's delve into it then. We can discuss all things mental health and how the church can relate with that and how it affects Christians and how we should be responding to these challenges. Anita, might you give us a definition of what we mean by mental health to start us off?
So I'll give you the NHS definition, and then I'll give you the history a bit of that term. But basically, mental health is our psychological, emotional, and social well-being, the state that those three things are, and how those three things interacts in affecting how we cope, feel, and act. So that's the NHS broad brush definition of mental health. But interesting, I looked into this a bit more, and that term has only come about since the 19th century, but it also evolved from mental hygiene because of the stigma that was around asylums and being in asylums. And so mental hygiene movement happened, and then that evolved post World War II to mental health, because they were trying to pull away from institutions, asylums, and trying to create a more positive approach to those with mental illness. But obviously, as we all know, the term has evolved into so much more in this current day, and how we see it and what that actually means when people talk about the mental health. But yeah, just to say that the origins are from that term is actually quite a new term. Yeah.
So what does mental hygiene mean? Is it just is it the same kind of thing? Because that to me sounds like cleaning your brain.
Yeah. So I think the general gist of mental hygiene was about positive approaches to managing our mental state, basically. Yeah. And so it's interesting because the swing, obviously early days, massively stigmatizing, actually quite shunned it when you had mental illness. And the mental hygiene movement was to swing more away from that stigma. And then mental hygiene turned into the term mental health to create more positive. So yes, you're right. It's now what we think of mental health is actually probably a bit more about how we're using the term, which is how to take care of our minds and our emotions better. And so swinging away from that stigma towards being more positive and affirming around taking care of your mind and emotions. So it's really swung definitely that way, more so now, I'd say. Sorry, Mark, you were going to say something I didn't...
No, well, I was just going to say on the history, it's interesting, as you were saying about the 19th century is where it's really changed, the start of mental health. Prior to that, the church would have played a key part,
yes.
In the cure of the souls. And actually, as the church kind of stepped back, is why increased. You have the, much more the secular involvements, the state, the role of psychiatrists and psychologists kind of growing into that, because the church actually stopped engaging in these kind of areas and working it out in the shift, particularly through the Enlightenment and all of those kind of issues over the 1800s that pushed us into where we are now.
Yeah, the term psychology and the term psychiatry, the Greek origins is, study of the soul and doctor of the soul. So absolutely, so it's fascinating, like you say, they'll swing away from looking at the soul, but that's actually the term for both of those things. Yeah.
And historically, we'd have spoken of pastoral care in the church as the cure of the souls. That would have been how it would have been thought of.
Yeah.
And you would speak to those in the church, pastors who were really there to help you in that area.
Okay, let's go more specifics then. What are the challenges at the moment? So it feels like there's been an explosion of people talking about mental health, maybe an explosion in the challenges and the people who are experiencing challenges with their mental health, or maybe it's just that we're talking about it more, but either way it's certainly on the radar more. So what are the challenges now? It's been a hard few years and people are presenting with mental health challenges left, right and centre. So what are the particular struggles, do you think, Anita?
Well, I mean, so when I hear that question, I think about different age demographic and generations as well, because also, as I said, the mental health term is being used quite differently and meant differently by the different generations as well of their understanding of it, because we've just talked about the history, and some of those people post World War II would be the older generation, the baby boomers, but then I think about, because I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I think about the younger generations of what they're meaning when they're saying mental health, because obviously a lot on social media and on YouTube of mental health advocates and mental health influencers. So there's a lot of talk and chatter on social media. So what people are meaning, and I think that's part of the problem, is what do people mean by mental health? I mean, even the other day, somebody, I won't name them, but a younger person in church was just going, oh no, but I need that for my mental health. Oh, okay. And I was thinking, what do you mean by that? And I'm a psychiatrist, so and so that term is certainly being used quite a bit by younger generations. But the older generations, it means something different because they've experienced mental health in a different form. growing up. So that's one challenge of when people are saying mental health, and depending on where they're sitting, what they mean by that and how they're seeing mental health as well. So I'd say that's a prominent issue I think I come across in my job. But then there's a little thing that happened called the pandemic as well. And
so I remember that.
Yeah, that's just a little thing that happened. So with that, there was variations of what was happening in certainly in the NHS, but in mental health. And I was usually looking at the stats, the ONS stats, and when the lockdowns happened, they showed a rise in mental health distress, depression, anxiety, and in certainly different age groups, you can see that there was a rise pre-pandemic, in the pandemic, and interestingly, post-pandemic, we're seeing that although it's coming down from 2020, 2021, it's still not lower than pre-pandemic. So we've got a very high rate, or higher rate, should I say, than pre-pandemic levels. So certainly I was looking at the referrals to IAPT is a therapy service here in the NHS, and the referrals have risen quite a bit as well for therapies. And so the challenge certainly in my field is knowing that we're at this higher rate of referrals into these services, and we don't have enough people to provide the support. But also there's like I said about that term, there's expectations of what the mental health services are going to provide, because often from my perspective, there's issues around, like I said, what is mental health? And so society's expectations of mental health services, psychiatrists, psychologists, of what we're going to fix, because some of those aspects are evolving from what's happening in society, in social media, and fixing things that we are not set up to fix, if that makes sense. So, so there's certainly several different challenges. There's even just resourcing of mental health services, and so therefore massive wait lists for people getting in, people getting sicker on those wait lists. So there's lots of challenges. But looking into the future, I can certainly see that mental health is in the fact that, because of societal influences, because of that term and how people are using it and thinking of it, that there'll probably be more and more pressure on the health service. Yes, I'll stop there because there's so much more I could say.
Mark, does this match what you're seeing as a pastor? Are you also seeing an increase in people coming to you or other people within the church struggling with mental health, or other pastors in the churches across the country? Is that a pattern that's continuing there?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Partly because, as Anita's alluded, there is, there's increased waiting lists in the NHS, so people are seeking help in different ways. But I think there is just an increase in that range of what we'd call mental health, the anxieties, the depressions that are there. And I think we're certainly seeing that. I think we're certainly seeing that post-pandemic. I think it's always been there. I think people are probably just getting better at talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think the more, and I think for a long while, even within the life of the church, it's been hidden, the shame that's attached often, the stigma. And I think the better we are at talking about that these are real struggles, real difficulties, actually just, that we can begin to talk, and therefore the church then becomes a place where we can find help. So therefore people are then speaking up about it. And I think there is just an increased pressure, alongside all the issues that Anita says, you've got increased, I need to mention social media, that's just putting on a huge pressure. I think you've got issues of identity that are just rife in our society right now. You've got an increased secularism, which means that therefore you've lost any sense of the transcendency of a God. You're kind of living within a box. And therefore, because you don't have those kind of, how do you make sense of the ongoing struggles of life, death? You've got an increased sense of expectation that life should go well and be happy, and the sense, and therefore when those things don't match up, because we live in a fallen world, which we as Christians understand, but if you're kind of, your expectation is the world's going to be really happy, everything's geared up to make you happy, well, a pandemic comes along, you're going to be crushed, and financial pressures come along, you're going to be crushed. What do you do with that? You have no explanation to that. And therefore, of course, anxiety fuels up, depression speaks in, alongside all the other wrestles and struggles that people have. So I think just where we are culturally right now, and I think probably we have been, just all those things coming together all at once.
Yeah, I wonder if people my age and younger, particularly more so than those older, have really been kind of groomed in a way to think the world is my oyster. I can I can achieve anything. It's all, I think I grew up and, when I was starting primary school, it was all Spice Girls and girl power and you can, it was all this excitement and you can do it. You can do anything. And I think as a child, I believed I could do anything I wanted to do, because that was the message probably throughout education. And I wonder if that's gone on. So perhaps, and then with social media, so those who are kind of growing up now, I think there's going to be so much of this. I'm expecting to be happy all of the time. And if I'm not, that's a massive problem.
There's definitely been a rise in anxiety and depression since the emergence of social media. There was suddenly a wave of college students, because there was always a little bit of anxiety and depression in university and the young adults. But then suddenly, around the early 2000s, there was a sudden spike and people were like, what's going on? But you can actually track back as to this massive, it was quite a big exponential rise when social media started to come in. And certainly that impact is felt in the younger generations, in areas of communication, expectations, comparison. All of that has been amplified through social media. And also online bullying is massively... That's what I experienced with the younger generations, that they are actually, police are having to be called in around some of the harassment they get, the threats that they get. So, and quite young ages, it's happening. So, social media's got a massive influence of the. Mental illness has existed before that, but the explosion is certainly partly we've seen it because of that. And I will say this, in the pandemic, that amplified even more because we were reliant on online for everything. And I happened to work in an eating disorder service for under 18-year-olds. And across the nation was a massive explosion of eating disorders across all ages, because we're all on camera, for those on YouTube, we are now. So this is the thing, that suddenly we're seeing ourselves even more. And now it's here to stay, potentially, this online kind of communication, that the camera amplified even more comparison and self-introspection of how you look and so forth. So
interesting, because even as you're talking, I'm literally seeing my face next to your face. I haven't really considered that, but if you're a teenager especially, that is really going to heighten that comparison, isn't it?
But it's all shaping our psychology and our thinking. And culture's often had is influential in mental health. This is the thing I was going to say about mental health. My perspective is I actually believe in health, not mental health, in the sense that there is a body-mind interaction. So there's lots of risk factors like chronic pain that influences your chance of getting depression, and abuse, childhood. The ACEs study is a very well-known study, adverse childhood events, that shows that if you've had lots and lots of these kind of events, it affects your chances of having heart disease, stroke, later in life, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. So there's definitely an interaction between what's happening in our bodies and our minds, and the other way around. So I know that we've separated out mental health, but I think I really am quite a strong believer in the body-mind influencing each other. So health is also part of that. But yes, we know that mental health has an influence from society, from how the culture is around you, your environment around you as well. So.
Mark, how does the gospel then speak into all of these kinds of challenges?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting just picking up what Anita just said, you know, in the sense of the body, mind, we're embodied souls. So at the end of the day, our souls are that which, you know, before, but they're embodied in a body that has, you know, a brain that is affected, but a physical body, and those things are all interacting all the time. But actually, at the end of the day, you know, the Bible tells us that actually the control center is the heart. And so how the heart responds to how my body is and how my, you know, the environment and the situations and the, you know, and actually how that then begins to play out is then often what creates lots of the other things. It's not, but actually, unless we're allowing the gospel to transform our hearts, that actually I'm finding my security, my identity, my comfort, my hope, my help in Jesus. My heart, as we know, it's just an idol factory, as Calvin says. You know, that's going to seek idols in anything else, you know, materialism, control, power, happiness. And those things then, when they become so big, they're going to impact how I live, it's going to impact my body, it's going to impact my brain, it's going to... So unless the gospel is transforming me at the very root, the core of who I am, and where I'm kind of, my hope, my confidence, my security is in Jesus, then it's only there that we can then begin to, you know, now that doesn't mean that a believer is not then going to wrestle with anxiety or fear or depression. But now I have a place that actually begins to help make sense alongside some of the other things that I can do, is that I want to tackle, how's my heart responding to this? What's this revealing about what I don't believe about the gospel or what I am believing? But it's slightly, all of those factors are going to be at play. And I think that's where the gospel then begins to really start to be the medicine that actually I need as I deal with the heart at the core.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark, because also what I was thinking is about the different therapies and medicines and their influence on that. But like you say, if we don't look at the actual soul, which is psychiatry and psychology, then we miss a massive chunk of how we're dealing with mental health. I was just thinking about the Proverbs 4 verse 23, above all else guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And it's like you say, and I think the definition of heart in that is the soul, actually, of like how we're managing our soul is how it affects everything else that we do. And I was also, another key chapter I often think about is 1 Kings 19 with Elijah. He's this massive man of faith, and he, you know, it's the prophets of Baal, they get slaughtered. He's just done this amazing thing. And yet he runs as soon as Jezebel says, you know, I'm going to kill you, basically. And it was kind of it's you can say that, but he ran in fear. And then how God deals with him in that chapter, I encourage anyone to read that chapter, because for me, that chapter is amazing, because God first deals with him resting, sleeping, eating, and even gives him some sustenance for the journey he has to make, and then eventually speaks to him. So there's a lot of interplay about the body and the soul and the mind and how God deals with him. So, you know, all of those things are interplaying in that chapter. And yet this is a man of great faith who's done incredible things, yet he himself crumbled, and God restored him through all of those different aspects of body, you know, rest and speaking to his soul, restoring him. And actually, because interestingly in that chapter, he is assuming he's on his own. And that's a key area where I think the church comes into it, because, and we know that from the stats and the evidence that community, a church community, and I was just looking, there's a massive book called the Religion and Medicine, Handbook of Religion and Medicine, about how religion influences health. And it's over and over again, good community will help with your mental health. So the reason I'm saying that is in 1 Kings 19, God says, you're not alone. I've actually set aside 7,000 prophets. So his perception was changed in realizing I'm not alone. Not only was God with him, but he'd actually set aside others for him. And I think not long after that comes Elisha, basically, So anyway, that's just...
I think that's key, isn't it? I think when we're struggling with these things, our own perceptions are often so far out, and we need others to come and say, no, I know you feel that, but that's not the truth. You feel alone, but you're not. Which I think, that really highlights that. Mark,
but just on that, it's just worth noting, like, social media has another impact on that, because social media has fed the lie that actually you have community. So people feel they have community through, TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp, but they don't. So someone like, the research, there's this sense of we're alone together. But there is this aloneness.
Totally.
And actually, church community is very different, which is why we want to gather, with God's people, why we want to be in small groups, why we want relationships with one another, because we're not made to be alone. But yet, anyway, social media has fed that lie.
I just want to absolutely emphasise that point, Mark, because there's also been a rise of loneliness amongst the younger generations. So, like you say, there's a connectedness online, but a sense of loneliness. And actually, that, I think the church is really well placed to, because one of the things I deal with a lot, and especially because of the restrictions, there was school lockdown, like people weren't going to school. Social phobia and social anxiety has started to come out more and more in the younger generations. And my perspective is you learn a lot being physically meeting with other people, that you learn social skills and you get over that social anxiety by actually, learning in safe, hopefully safe community, how to communicate with others face to face. So certainly in my perspective, the way, and even it was funny the other day, I walked down the corridor and 3 teenagers, again, won't name who they are, were in the corridor at church, and 2 of them were on their phones opposite each other. I'm not sure what they were doing, and another one was trying to talk to the 2 of them. So it's interesting how the influence of technology is influencing how we're communicating, but then also how we cope with face-to-face communication, and how we're managing our peer relationships. But the other thing is, that's why I think the older generation is being brought in the church to kind of bring a different perspective on how to interact with each other, and to guide the younger generations is really quite key.
Yeah. Mark, as a pastor, what would you say to a member of the church, your church, comes up to you and says, "Oh, I'm really struggling with depression," and they are just racked with guilt over feeling that, but I'm a Christian, I know I shouldn't feel that, I must be sinning, this is either a punishment from God, or I'm disbelieving something, and I feel so guilty about these feelings of lowness. What do you say to them? Why are you smiling?
Well, I'm smiling because
You're so happy.
If someone said that to me on a Sunday morning, I'm not sure I'd be able to answer it. All the multiple layers of questions. But
someone rings you up and says,
fired at me in that point, or even if they phone me up, I think you'd want to sit down with them, and you'd want to have the conversations really, and Anita's spoken about Elijah, but I mean, there's just been through the history of the church. Those of faith, Spurgeon wrestled with depression for years after a fire, or it wasn't a fire, someone called fire, and a number of people died through a prank in his church. He just wrestled with depression for the rest of his life, alongside physical ill health, and just struggled. William Cooper, again, just another. So many have wrestled with depression in the history of the church and faith. So it can't be a link between I sin, therefore depressed, or I have done this and this is God's punishment on me. That's just too simplistic. But you want to slow down and talk with someone about that, and then and having the conversation with someone as they talk about, okay, what is going on in your life right now, and actually sometimes there's so much stuff going on. No wonder they're wrestling or struggling. Or they're feeling anxious, or it may be that they've also not believed something rightly of Scripture, that they've got themselves so tangled up in an unbelief and they just need to hear the truth re-spoken to them gently. They may just need, encouragement, comfort, but there will be sin involved because we're sinners and we're saints. None of us are just, but it is not a direct correlation. And I think in lots of these conversations, as we talk with people, is often we would advise go and get a GP checkup. It may be that medication is needed. It may be that medication is not needed. Some people find it helpful. Some people don't find it helpful. Some people want to go on it. Some people don't want to go on it. I think one of the biggest struggles actually the church faces is that in our culture and because of the history, as we talked at the beginning, is that there's a sense whereby people begin to feel that this isn't an arena for the church. Therefore I'm depressed, or I'm struggling with bipolar, or I'm anxious, or whatever it is. Therefore, this is the world of the NHS. So I need a doctor, I need a psychiatrist, and we want to absolutely say that people like Anita have huge skill that is massively helpful to people who are suffering, but we also recognise that actually there is something, as we keep talking about the soul, the cure of the soul, that actually this is where the church can help. And often, sometimes it's a combination. Sometimes actually someone gets medical help and they have someone who they can talk with, who maybe a pastor, a counsellor in the life of the church, who's a believer, who can help them work through some of the stuff. Sometimes they find the medication doesn't help them, but actually talking through. But what I want to encourage is that don't think the church isn't the place to turn to for help, because I think the church is the place to turn for help. But I think we have this mentality in our culture, more so probably than the US, where the US is much more of a counselling, so they have an expectation of the church in that. But over here, we're very much quick to, the NHS, we have a fantastic service. But actually, I want to say, why not actually talk with someone in the church?
There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on from that, Mark, because interestingly, I was just, again, looking at this book of religion and medicine, and the stats show that generally, being in a good religious community helps, but interestingly, wrong theology doesn't help. So what you were just saying about a punitive God, a harsh God, those are things that push you more towards depression. So, like you say, this area of making sure, again, that doesn't what causes depression, but important when you say that those areas of wrong belief are part of the teaching as well, so that people are understanding what kind of God we do have and serve and believe in, and also how we see ourselves. The other thing I wanted to kind of talk about was just that general feeling of what you talked about earlier about identity. A lot of what I think we walk out is our identity as Christians, our identity in Christ, and making sure it's really secure and centered in Christ, and the other things that try and pull us away from that. I think often there's seasons in that as well. So for instance, motherhood, becoming a mother can be a time, or parenthood can be a time of huge stress. It can be joyful, it can be stressful. Then there's the empty nest syndrome, which can be, so there can be moments of grief in those identities, widowhood, health. There's a lot of seasons that we walk out in life. And I think the Bible certainly speaks to the different seasons. Certainly David came across as quite low and depressed in the Psalms, in his soul. And so there is and Job himself, who knows what his soul was, or we see some of it in his soul. So the point is that there are seasons to our life as well, and it's important to remember that, and not be quick to go to also, I must be mentally well. I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying we have to also take a step back and go, there's seasons to life. There's an identity that God is crafting in us as believers, and to be aware of those seasons. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So there's a sense of when we walk things out, it's also potentially Christ being shaped in us in those seasons as well. Because there will be times of anxiety, there will be times of depression that we will all at some point go through for whatever various reasons. And The other aspect was thinking not just identity is meaning as well, because often we're looking for meaning, and that's not just us as believers, that's the whole world. They're looking for meaning, and often in that struggle is where anxiety and depression comes out as well, where we don't understand why things have happened a certain way, and we can become low or anxious either way, because we just don't understand. And that's where our souls will be driven sometimes.
Yeah. And that's, when we talk about the church as the answer, what we're really saying is God's word has the answer. The scriptures, is full, David, Job, Elijah, that Anita's mentioned, of just guys who have wrestled with that. But more than that, we fundamentally believe that God's word is sufficient, that it can speak into the greatest complexities of life. And it's not just a toolbox that we kind of, here's a verse and stick on. The scriptures have taken me to the Lord Jesus, to relational depth with him. So actually what we're wanting is, as I wrestle with the struggle might not go away, but actually what does it look like to walk with Jesus in this struggle, as I'm anxious, as I'm fearful, as I'm depressed, as I'm wrestling with whatever else is going on? What does it look like to relate to Jesus in that? How does he begin to change that? And sometimes that will bring relief and comfort. For sometimes it just means he's walking with me through these dark valleys. And it's hard, but I know Jesus is with me, and I know the hope that he brings and the comfort he brings and the help that he brings, and how he's refining me and changing my identity and my meaning in the midst of that. And I think that's often the missing kind of bit when we're talking about the struggles in the life of the church, because we want the medicine, because we think if we have that will fix everything, and it will help, but it won't fix everything, because we're talking about the soul, and we're talking about the heart, and we're talking about how we're responding to that, and how our body's relating to that, and to the situations that we're facing in life. And the only one who has the answers is the Lord Jesus, and his word is sufficient to us in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just thinking about Job as well, and that initial phase of his friends sitting with him in the pain. Obviously, we know there were some really unhelpful things that were said, but just that initial phase of sitting with him in the pain. And there's the horizontal, is that the right way? Horizontal, and vertical, where...
No, other way. This is horizontal.
I've got the wrong way, sorry. Well, you know what I'm saying, which is that there's the relational fellowship with the Lord, and then there's the that way a relationship with one another, of sitting sometimes in the pain and the grief or whatever it may be.
Just before we finish then, what are some ways that we can, just as ordinary believers, help one another in this? So somebody like me who has no qualifications in counselling or medicine or any of this, but I'm just a normal believer, and how can someone like me, I'm not a pastor, how can someone like me help those within the church who are struggling with various mental health challenges?
I mean, I think just going back to that last example of how you sit with somebody matters actually in it. And when you have somebody, potentially if you're in an unhealthy place as the person struggling, you as potentially the believer who may be in a healthy place, because, we mourn with those who mourn, we rejoice with those who rejoice, but also in some ways you might need to carry their burden for a little while, potentially. But how that looks, because I also want to encourage believers that there's a place sometimes to correct, in the sense that not in a punitive way and you should be believing this and so forth, but, to, for instance, say, we know that going for a walk could help someone's mental health, but the person may not feel like going for a walk. But the person who comes alongside them goes, let's just go for this walk. I know you don't feel like it, just go step out the door, And that's what I mean by, as a believer, if they're sinking, that sometimes it is also the encouragement towards just the step outside the door or the step outside the bed, whatever it is, basically. So there's simple things that can be done, like sitting with the person, but also knowing the point where they may need to take a step out of a certain mindset or place where they're sitting in at the right point. Obviously, prayer is huge as well. And I think, prayer in wisdom of how to approach the person, because also you as the person may not be the right person, and it's recognizing that because sometimes there's impatience that comes with people who are mentally unwell, for the people around them, and knowing I need a time out myself because it's too heavy. So just knowing what role can you play. So for instance, if you think, I just think the person that needs to pray in the background, that's me because I get too impatient and I make it worse. Or the person who goes for that walk or goes for that coffee, who just sits with the person, or makes them a meal. All of those things form different parts of the body, I think, when somebody is struggling. Mark, I'm sure you've got other things to add.
I think that's exactly it. It's interesting. There's you can hear the full interview on the BBC UK website, but at their recent conference, they had a video from a lady who had suffered with intrusive thoughts, just horrific, just in the sense of how it was and how that makes you feel anxious, fearful, kind of withdraws. And she met with a biblical counsellor who helped her, but one of the things was actually she just had a faithful friend who turned up every Tuesday at kind of 4 o'clock, whatever time it was, and that lasted for 7 years. She was just a faithful friend in that sense. They didn't know each other particularly well, I don't think, beforehand, but it just so happened, I can't remember what the connection was, whether they're in the same small group or whatever, but just being a friend, turning up and being present counts for huge amounts when you're feeling low, when you're feeling anxious. Now, it may be that you can't commit every week, but actually I think some of us, we probably can do more, in that it's just that sense, but we kind of feel like, we can't get involved, we've got to walk away, and we've got to be led by the person may not want that.
Yeah, that's right.
But if that is of help, just presence and reading the Bible, a few verses, praying with them, being that help. So those simple things that look just so simple to us can be so profound in the recovery of someone who is struggling. And just to know that you're loved in that way. And part of what we try and do at Christchurch is, if someone is struggling, we put like a kind of a team of support around someone, so that there will be meeting with someone who is a counselling them in that sense, biblically. That they'll have someone who is just a friend who turns up, who tries to invite them to walk, to just keep on. So they kind of keep this visiting throughout the week. We put in meals where we can. If they need practical help, we have a team that will try and support them in that. So we're kind of, rather than just one believer feeling they've got to have the whole weight of caring and being the counsellor, the person who prays with them, reads the Bible and goes for a walk, there's a team that begins to care for someone. Ideally from their own small group. It doesn't always work perfectly, but actually, when you begin to see a number of people kind of helping, caring, loving, it speaks volumes.
And I guess even small churches can do that, because you wouldn't necessarily have a team for this, but actually one person can do bringing some meals around, one person can do this.
Can I just add one more thing to that? Because I think it's about being family as well. And I just think about, when somebody's particularly struggling, I think about the spouse, I think about the kids. I think about, so potentially you may not be the person directly helping the person who's struggling. You might be helping the spouse, you might be helping the child. So then you're supporting that person, because you're also helping carrying the burden for the people around them in that family, so that the wider family becomes family to them. So your role may not be directly to the person who's suffering, but to those who are around them, so that they can keep going and supporting that person, because it can be really wearing for the people who are closest to that person.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
As we close then, have either of you got any good books that you would recommend on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you're going to recommend the same one, Mark, but I was thinking Mental Health in the Church by Steve Midgley and Helen Thorne. And the other one is, you got it already, Am I My Brain, which isn't quite directly about, it's Sharon, I can't say her name, Dix?
Something like that.
Something like that.
DYCK.
But you say it in a different way. She did a PhD on MRIs and basically kind of teasing apart, because at this current day and age with evolution and kind of blaming it on the brain, she's really good at pulling out the arguments that we're not just our brain and our chemicals. And there's a lot of evidence for that. And then I would actually also recommend the CCEF podcast. Actually, I listen to that quite a bit, where there's lots of different topics on mental health and seeing it through a biblical lens.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, to that, there's a little series called Ask the Christian Counsellor. In that, it's one called I Have a Psychiatric Diagnosis by Ed Welch. Just really helpful, very small, and then just has lots of other references at the back for those struggling with depression, anxiety, trauma. That would be helpful. So they have other little books in that series as well, which are just very helpful. Just to say, the mental health in the church, we at Christchurch are running that as a book group over the coming weeks. So if you want to know more, contact me.
Cool. I also would recommend two more by Ed Welch. I think it's called Depression. I think Looking Up from the Stubborn Darkness. And Running Scared, which is anxiety. And then also for women, Linda Dillow's Calm My Anxious Heart is really helpful at tackling the heart issues behind why we feel anxious and walking that through with Jesus.
Let me just finish by saying, like, if you are struggling, and there will be that, don't walk in on your own in this. The sense of this we've spoken about, shame just covers us, and actually, do reach out. And actually, we do have contacts with guys who can help alongside the great, in the NHS and all the skills in there, but biblical counsellors who can really help work with folks in the midst of this.
And if you're a listener who's not part of Christchurch, which I think there are some, do reach out to your local church. And if you don't have a local church, email us. We can point you into, we can point you in a direction.
To someone who maybe help. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thanks very much. Thank you, Anita, for coming and being a special guest. And we will.
Yeah, thank you.
We will catch you next time. Bye-bye.